it wasn't as a result of 702 that this whole thing was stopped. That's the story that was told. And there were a couple of those examples that went out that just factually were not exactly the way they were being told.
I got a cup of coffee in hand. I got show notes here, and I got two awesome books right here by my guest, FX Regan. How are you?
I'm doing good. I got a copy here too, just in case.
Yeah, hang that thing back up one more time so they can see it.
Ta-da.
Rosalyn Station, right there.
Thanks for having me, Jeff. I appreciate it.
Yeah, man, I'm excited to get started. I got some questions, and I got your Substack on 702, and I want to get
Wow.
into that a little bit too. I read through
You
it.
got it.
Of course, you're way more of an expert on it than I am, but I want to hear your thoughts on it, and I want to point out some basic things when it comes to our privacy and this act and what 702 really is. But first, let's hear about you. You have a career in law enforcement. How long were you in law enforcement?
A little more than 32 years.
And what all did you do while you were in law enforcement?
So, right out of college, I was a local law enforcement officer in a pretty big metropolitan police department right outside of Washington, D.C. I did that for a number of years, and then I transitioned to the FBI. Applied there, got accepted, went to Quantico, graduated from the FBI Academy, and had another 25-year career after that.
That's a long career. That's a
Yeah.
very, very long career.
Yeah.
What are some of the unique jobs that you did while in law enforcement, specifically the FBI?
Wow. So I had 7 transfers in the FBI. So they saw fit to bounce my family around the country. There were
Wow.
7 transfers, but 7 different jobs, but 6 transfers. Um, and boy, my career ran the gamut. I was a street agent for almost 8 years. Then I kind of got in the management cone. Not kind of. I got in the management cone, which takes you back to the FBI headquarters, which for people familiar with the military is kind of staff time at the Pentagon.
Mm,
You go back there and kind of learn how the big machine works, how
yep.
the FBI works with Washington, D.C., the rest of the intelligence community, things like that. Did that for about 3 years. Got transferred to another field office as a squad supervisor. Another good analogy for the military might be like being a captain, your first command.
Okay.
Uh, af- After that, I was promoted to an assistant special agent in charge of an FBI field office, and that maybe being a colonel. Um, After that, I went back to FBI headquarters for another touch base at their version of the Pentagon. And then finally, my last assignment was special agent in charge of an FBI division. So I ran a whole field office.
Wow, wow. So yeah, I mean that's a long career. I'm sure you've
Yeah.
seen some stuff. What's kind of one of the highlights of your career that you can kind of think of like the top of your head?
So there was an old saying when I was in the Bureau, and I've been retired for going on 12 years now, which is hard to believe. Um, but there's an old saying that the two best jobs were being a street agent and being the agent in charge of a division. Everything else in between was okay, and everything else after. And there were other promotional abilities that I could have pursued, like being an assistant director, or being an executive assistant director, or really being a big muckety muck. But the two best positions, they say, were being a street agent and being the agent in charge of an FBI field office, and that's true. So I had a terrific time for the 8 years I was a street agent. I worked on a violent crime squad, and this was back when the bureau was really doing a lot of violent crime work. They don't do as much now. It's much more focused on national security, counterintelligence, counterterrorism, cyber. Um, and I think the highlight, literally, I was involved in a long term undercover operation. I was the case agent, not the undercover agent. And this thing literally went on for about 3 years. We had about a year and a half of the two agents that were operating undercover doing you know, basically an import export business where we recovered somewhere around $3 million worth of luxury automobiles, boats, tractor trailers,
Wow.
stolen engines from a Ford assembly plant. It was just a really cool operation. And then another year and a half of trial. Probably the best part of my career.
So you were definitely in law enforcement during 9/11. Um, Let me ask you this.
Mhm.
How did things change from your point of view after 9/11?
So they changed professionally and they changed personally. They changed personally because on 9/14, what, 3, 4 days later, I was in my FBI car driving to Washington, D.C. because planes weren't flying yet. I had immediately been assigned back to headquarters because I'd spent some time in the counterterrorism arena. So I went back to FBI headquarters and kind of helped crisis manage the initial investigation regarding the planes that flew into the World Trade Center and then the one into Shanksville, obviously. I was assigned to a flight team. I was on the Flight 9/11 team. So we were, for 3 or 4 weeks, just consumed with finding every detail about uh, Flight 11 on 9/11. Shortly after that, I got sent overseas to become the acting legat of one of our operations over there that was thick with Al Qaeda. Did that for a couple months, came back to the field office I was assigned to for about 2 more months, and I was immediately sent back to FBI headquarters for another 3 months. And then shortly after that, I got promoted to be an assistant special agent in charge of a field division. So, you know, personally, it really affected me. Professionally, I watched the organization do literally a 180 from being a primarily crime fighting organization to primarily being an intelligence driven organization focused on threats from counterterrorism, counterintelligence, and cyber.
And that's going to lead us into a discussion about 702, and there's the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act that we're going to talk about here
Uh-huh.
in a little bit. But before we get into that, I want to ask you how you kind of got into writing. Did you did you know when you retired from the FBI that you were going to write a book, or did it something that happened afterwards? Are you a longtime reader? How did it kind of maturate?
Yeah, so you hit on the last part. I was a lifelong reader, from a young kid reading the Hardy Boys and Joseph Wamba, and um, a lot of true crime, a lot of fiction relating to crime, and so always had an interest in that. I never thought I'd be a writer, um, and especially when you're in law enforcement, and anybody out there that's been in law enforcement knows that writing is not really conducive to law enforcement. It's very pro forma, very just the facts, third person. Um, there's no literary aspect to writing a police report, or in the FBI we call it an FD 302, a report of interview. So I never thought that would be a path I would be on. And then shortly after I retired, I kind of sat down. I spent some time penning an autobiography. I wanted it to be different than every autobiography I've read of police officers or former FBI agents, and it was not. It was just wasn't great. As hard as I tried to steer away from being different, it wasn't.
Mm-hmm.
Which led me to really looking at it and thinking, as I wrote it, I changed a lot of things. I changed names. I changed places. So it was sort of fictionalized. So I thought, well, why not just take this one step further and do some fiction? And that's where I really got the impetus to write some fiction. I had a short career after law enforcement where I was involved in private security. I was a consultant with my own firm. I worked in corporate security for two large firms. But when I stopped doing any of that, I really had some time to focus on writing fiction, and that's how I got into that.
Do you find a lot of authors, especially veterans and folks in intelligence agencies that I have interviewed and I've gotten to know, have found a therapeutic value in writing? With you having the long career that you had, you've obviously been deployed. You're, 9/11 and counterterrorism. You've seen some things. I think that's pretty obvious. What do you find writing has as a benefit to you post career?
Well, I find that it provides a lot of information for me to write to, and I've said this in some of my blog posts and things like that. That almost everything I write about really happened. I mean, I just change the locations, I change some names, I change some of the way these things happen, but they're all true stories. So I just have a lot stuck in my head that I feel I can get out pretty easily and not have to make stuff up.
That's fair. I think that's fair. I think
Yeah.
a lot of the veterans that I've talked to have found a therapy in writing, an outlet that kind of gives
Hmm.
them a chance to talk about their emotions without directly talking about it and connecting it to them. And I think that is it's a very special connection and bond with kind of that written word that um, I think a lot of people need to utilize more.
Right. No, 100%. And I think any fiction writer that says there's not a little bit of them in the fiction, they're probably not telling you the truth. It comes out.
Oh yeah, 100%. It comes out in something, whether it's the
Yeah.
actual character, um, the 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 kind of the attitude and the swagger of a certain
Hmm.
character, the way it's personal. I mean, it's
Right.
absolutely personal. Um, let's talk a little bit about some of the books that you have, and you sent me two, and thank you very much again. These are
Yep.
awesome. The first one you sent me is your Area 51 Project Series, Volume 1, which is three Detective Blackjack Morrison novellas, which is really cool and very interesting. When did you do this, and how did it come to be to do three novellas?
Okay. So my first foray into writing fiction was almost 3 years ago. And I wrote two full length fiction novels that involve a character I call CJ Hawk, who is a former FBI agent who becomes a private investigator and gets involved in doing some investigations of homicides in the Washington, D.C. area. He gets retained to kind of do these. And I spent about a little more than probably about a year and a half doing both, putting both of them together. Well, one of my problems or challenges, I should say, it's not a problem, is my employment agreement with the FBI requires that I submit my manuscripts to them, even if they're fiction, and
Mm-hmm.
for them to be able to go through there and make sure there's nothing classified or nothing sensitive about the FBI. And so when I did that, I realized I had some time on my hands while I waited for these to come back. And I had submitted these to some agents, some editors, some publishers, and things like that. So as I waited for all of this to kind of come back to me, I kind of had a fascination with Area 51. I'd read a couple books about it. I actually had a long, full length novel in mind for my character, CJ Hawk, to be involved in Area 51. And so I thought to myself, well, why not make this not FBI centric, to just make it about a Washington, D.C. detective that doesn't have to go back to the FBI for pre publication review? And why don't I do a quick novella, see how that works, submit it through Amazon self publishing to see how that works. And pretty soon I was on the path of doing three of them. And I did, kind of in rapid succession. I think they're all 35, 40,000 words at the most. Put all three of those together, got them self published, got a little bit of traction with them. I think some people were interested in them, got great feedback. So I put them together in one volume, which you showed, which allowed me to go out and find a narrator so I could put it on Audible.
Oh, you have
It
it
made
on
it worth
Audible.
it. Yeah, it's on Audible. It's available on Audible,
Oh, I didn't know that.
Apple.
That's
Yeah,
cool.
yeah, it is cool. And we've got some reviews, some good reviews, and some good sales on that too. So I did all that, and that was probably a year long process. When I finished that, I did another novella, my first Kiki Diaz novella called Rosalyn Station. Put that together, sent it out to a couple beta readers, and got some great feedback on that. And so I decided to turn that into more of a full length, which
Which
I spent another. There you go,
I
Roslyn
got right
Station.
here.
Yeah. So I spent another 6 months or so polishing that up, turning it into a more 75,000 word full length novel. Self published that. I've since gotten authorization from the FBI to publish my first um, CJ Hawk novel. I'm looking to do that in 2024. Have some bites from smaller publishers. Still kind of shopping that around. I'm determined the first one's going to come out for sure in 2024. I don't know what format it's going to be. I don't know if I'll self-publish it. I don't know if it'll be a smaller press. I don't know if maybe an agent will shop it around to a bigger big five, but we'll see. It's coming out in 2024 no matter what. So that's kind of the path I've been on.
That's cool. And we're going to talk about Rosalyn Station here in a minute because I know
Yeah,
that's the newest one. But
yeah,
what can people kind of expect in the new book? Would you say CJ Hawk?
yeah. CJ Hawk,
What? Give me the elevator pitch for that.
10-4. So the first one is called it's preliminarily called Department Echo, and there's a reason that has that name. And readers will find out at the end why it's Department Echo. I won't spoil that for them. But it's based on a true story. It has something to do with an investigation that I was involved in 35 years ago on a very, very tangential basis. And it's a case that stayed with me for a long time. It's always in the back of my mind. I always wanted to do something about it. And so, putting it into a fiction book about this character, CJ Hawk, just really worked. CJ is a former Alexandria police officer who becomes a FBI agent, gets involved in he's the SWAT team leader for Washington field office during a bank robbery takedown. It goes tragically wrong. An FBI agent gets killed. CJ Hawk, being the team leader, is held partially responsible, and as we say, dismissed from the roles of the FBI. So he hangs up his own shingle, becomes a private investigator, and as fate would have it, an old homicide detective that he worked with when he was at the PD came to him and asked for help to solve this homicide that he knew about, and actually was the first officer on the scene. And then it spirals out of control from there. He runs into some evil forces, he runs into bureaucracy, runs into conspiracy, and eventually solves the case.
Very cool. Very cool.
Yeah,
So you're excited
yeah,
to get that out in
I am.
2024.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah,
right now, Rosalyn Station is out, right?
it's out.
It's out. You
It's
can pick
on.
it up now.
Pick it up now on Amazon in print, on ebook, and that is under construction for Audible as well. I've retained a really, really good narrator for that one, and I'm excited to get that back and get it out too in Audible.
So let's hear a little bit about Rosalyn Station and why people should go pick it up.
Sure. So, as I said, it started out as a novella. After having written three other novellas and two other full length books about male protagonists, I decided to try my hand at a female. And part of that was driven by the fact that my very first field training officer, the very first shift I worked as a police officer, I was assigned to a female field training officer. And she was fabulous, became a mentor of mine. We actually went on to teach full time together at the police academy. And so I decided to make the hero of Rosin Station a female. So Kiki Diaz is a detective sergeant with the Fairfax County Police Department, and Rosin Station takes her through 10 years, the first 10 years um, of her career, and it alternates. That I did this on purpose. It was hard. I might never do it again, but it takes the timeline in the book alternates between the present day and chapters that have to do with the first 10 years of her career. The present day, the plot of the story is she's on her way to the federal courthouse in Washington, D.C. to testify in a federal trial about a human trafficking case that she was the primary undercover officer on. And she gets on the metro because she lives near the metro station in Vienna. And on her way to Washington, D.C., all hell breaks loose because there are forces that do not want her to testify and, in fact, are interested in her helping to disrupt this trial. And so you go back and forth between the metro stops between Vienna and the federal courthouse in Washington, D.C., and what happens and how she resolves that once she gets to the courthouse.
Okay, very cool. Now, how did you kind of come up with the character of Kiki Diaz? Because you said, okay, it's time to maybe try to challenge myself and write a
Mm-hmm.
female protagonist. Um, did she turn out the way you envisioned her, or was it kind of a surprise along the way of how it kind of developed?
No, I would say the way I envisioned her, she's very strong. Um, she's 100% devoted to her career, probably at the expense of other things. And yeah, I think, she's highly promotable, very smart, and, manages to extricate herself from some very difficult situations.
Okay, what would you say her biggest advantage or characteristic is?
She's smart.
She's smart.
She's
What's her
really
biggest
smart. Yeah.
flaw?
She's way over devoted. Needs to take some time and have outside influences and other things besides the department.
Okay. So is this going to be a series? You're going to do a lot more of these after the CJ Hawk book?
Yeah, 100%. I'm already halfway through the second book, which is called FX Station,
Mm,
where Kiki is given her first real homicide investigation. She's assigned to homicide now. After Rosalyn Station, she gets assigned to homicide, and her first assignment, and it's in the back of the book, so I'm not spoiling anything. There's a couple sample chapters there. Is the governor of Virginia is assassinated, and she gets the ticket on that. So right out of the gate, she's investigating the murder of the governor of Virginia.
really?
Yeah,
Well, I didn't realize that the you included a little sneak peek of Fairfax Station in there. I'm going to have to
yeah.
dive into that. That's cool. So you have been involved in law enforcement for a long time. You're writing about it. It's coming out from your experiences, and you started a Substack, and you have
Mhm.
a very interesting take on was it FISA or FISA 702?
FISA.
The FISA, the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, and it's something that started. People don't really realize this. They can't think they kind of focus on the last 20 years, but it started back in like 78, back in the
Hmm.
70s,
Hmm.
and it's been renewed, and it really became a different ordeal after 9/11, and you wrote it's a long and very thorough. I will tell you that. I don't want to discourage anybody from going and reading it, because you absolutely should, and I'm going to link your Substack in the show notes so people can click on it and go check it out for themselves. um, but it's very thorough, and what I think is very important for people to know, and I want to talk about here, is that it is a surveillance act that had a purpose that is now being utilized in a far different purpose. And you said it really well in your Substack, where it was basically like writing the law. The law says right now it's unlawful to rob a bank. However, the way they're kind of looking at it is like writing a law to say that it's unlawful to rob a bank, and then praising themselves for saying, hey, we wrote the law that said it's
Right,
unlawful to rob the bank.
right.
And can you elaborate on that, and like what 702 is and why you kind of made that statement specifically?
Sure. So you're right. 702 is really complicated, and I had been involved in FISA full time for 3 years. I had over 100 FISA investigations that I managed on a full time basis for 3 years, and then I was tangentially involved in it, for the rest of my career, which is probably another 13 or 14 years after that. So I knew a lot about it, and this was the old FISA, as you said, from 1978, which is akin to the federal wiretap statute. It's the national security side of it. And then after 9/11, immediately after 9/11, there was a fear that the U.S. government wasn't capturing the data, the information that it needed to stop the next attack. So it was a rush to come up with other techniques. And I talk about it in the article, and I did some research on it. And I'd known some of this before, but I really delved into it just to make sure I had my finger on the truth of it. Two programs that were integral before 702 was a thing, and 702, we use that phrase. It's literally Section 702 of the FISA
Mm-hmm.
statute. So if you're going through the statute, you get to Section 702, and that's what describes what's going on here. Um, so the two programs that preceded FISA 702 were PRISM, and I'm drawing a blank on the other one, but it'll hit me in a second, which basically allowed the government, without any legislation, to capture an enormous amount of email uh, and metadata from the atmosphere. And metadata is the address, the subject, the from. The stuff at the top of your emails is called metadata.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, Beneath that's called the content. So the government was allowed to collect that stuff by virtue of really just a couple signatures from NSA and the blessing of the vice president and the president to capture that data, because their motives were pure. They were looking for the next attack. And those of us that are old enough to remember We were all convinced right after 9/11 there was going to be another attack. It was imminent. Everybody felt it. They thought it was going to happen. It was
Right.
a rolling cycle, and it was just a matter of time before that happened. So these programs were in place, and a lot of information was being collected, metadata on emails and on your cell phone information was being collected, and it came out. Edward Snowden made it known. Um,
Yeah.
it came out when John Ashcroft was hospitalized, and Bob Mueller, the FBI director, and Jim Comey, who at the time was the deputy attorney general, rushed to the hospital to try to get um, the attorney general not to reauthorize this because they were uncomfortable with it. So it came out that these programs existed. Stellar Wind, I'm sorry, that's the other program. The first one was Stellar Wind. The second one was Prism. Read the article, and I encourage people to do their own research. There's a lot of information out there on the internet that's uh, factual. Read that book, Dark Mirror, by Barton Gellman. That's actual. Um, and so these programs came out. And so what Congress did was say, we got to hurry up and make this thing legal. So they passed 702, which basically just codified what was going on anyway.
Hmm.
And so here we are. That sort of information is being collected regularly by the NSA, stored by the FBI. And really, as I talk about in the article, the difficult part about it is not only is it being collected, it's being analyzed and being collated with other information. Even the assistant director of NSA talked about the three hop rule. So if, say a bad guy in Pakistan calls his doctor in Chicago, it has nothing to do with terrorism, but he makes that call and he's a known bad guy in Pakistan, then the NSA is jumping three hops from that doctor to whoever the doctor is talking to. So, you multiply that the number of hops that are taking place, and we're talking about literally tens of millions of metadata that's out there that's being collected in one system. And I think the scary part is that it can be looked up for the asking. There's no warrant procedure to go into the 702 database, they call it, and ask, run information. So, you know, Jeff Clark's in there. There's no reason that nobody needs a warrant to go ask the 702 database. Tell me everything you know about Jeff Clark. There are rules, but rules are not laws. Rules are not probable cause. Rules are not
Yeah.
don't need a warrant. And the FBI has demonstrated in the past that they've slipped up on these rules. There were 2021 there were 1.3 million queries of this database just to see who Jeff talks to, and that can be problematic.
And it's scary because as you wrote in your Substack, uh, under the current rules, parts of FISA 702 constitute a general search warrant, which is prohibited under Fourth Amendment of the Constitution.
Mhm.
A general search warrant, so as you say, they can go in there and they can query and they can just see what Jeff Clark has been up to. The scary parts of that is that it essentially authorizes the collection of massive amounts of private information on American citizens, not just metadata, but like as you said, they're taking the hop from one person to another. Oh, he talked to a doctor. Who's the doctor talking to? The way they're taking that hop is it's an invasion of what you know. You might have a conversation with someone that's your privacy, but they can tap into that. I think the even scarier thing is that they know this is wrong. The CIA and NSA are prohibited by charter from collecting intelligence on U.S. citizens. Yet
Yes. So, I mean,
they can do it at the click of a button.
yeah, you'll note in the article, you probably did because I know you read it, that that's kind of a bugaboo of mine that the CIA and NSA are even able to access this database. I don't have a problem with the FBI accessing it with a warrant based on probable cause. But because those two agencies are not authorized by their very charter from collecting on U.S. citizens, it doesn't seem to me that they should be able to go into the 702 database and run the identifiers of an American citizen. They don't do it a lot comparatively, but I don't think they should do it at all. I think that if they believe, and I don't want to limit the ability of the intelligence community to do their job. If they pick up information from a bad guy in Pakistan, they need to be able to run that down.
Sure.
But I've not seen anything where they couldn't run that down, either through the authorities the FBI had before 702, or going and getting an emergency FISA, which I talk about in the article, I have seen done in less than an hour.
Wow.
Um, so the idea that we have to be able to hurry up and run Jeff Clark's information because a terrorist attack is imminent, I've never seen a case of that. And in the run up to the reauthorization, which has already happened, I mean, I wrote that article before reauthorization. Not that I was trying to stop it, but I just was writing it in real time when the reauthorization of 702 was being considered. Um, they, I just felt like there needed to be probable cause for that to happen.
I agree. I think I'm fine with, for the security of us and our country, that law enforcement and intelligence agencies have the tools they need to do their job. And I was in the
Mm-hmm.
military. I always needed the things I needed the tools I needed to do my job with. And I have no problem with that. But I think probable cause. It's almost a get out of jail free card. Like, oh, we can do this under the umbrella of national security. So by doing that, because there's an existing database out there, it's like the CIA and NSA said, well, hey, can we tap into that too? Because, we have kind of the same thing going on here, and we're trying to hunt down Al Qaeda and bin Laden and all this stuff. That's awful. That would be awful helpful to us too. It just kind of skirting around the rule. Like, well, we wrote it in a charter that you can't do that on American citizens for a reason. And then now you're using it and you're justifying your actions by saying, well, in order to keep you safe, we have to essentially spy on you. Like, I don't know. That kind of sounds a little shady. And I just read Snowden's book over Christmas, actually. So it's
Mm-hmm.
funny that we're talking about this. And that book reads like a thriller novel. Like the things that he went through and the things that he saw, and like the stakes and what he risked to um, kind of expose some of these things. Now, I'm not necessarily defending him and saying he went about it correctly, but some of the things that he exposed and said really bothered me. It really scared me the way that information was being leveraged and used, um, and how our privacy was essentially disregarded.
Yeah, 2 points. One, I agree with you on the Snowden thing. He had other options.
Yeah.
In my opinion, he should have taken that information. And, there are a number of national security lawyers out there that would have taken his case and walked him up to Congress and made this known.
Yeah.
So I disagree with how he went about this. But secondly, the examples that, and I talk about this in the article, the examples that the intelligence community was rolling out here right before the reauthorization debate took place, I can knock down every one of those as not critical to 702. They talk about a terrorist in Pakistan called, uh, I know the name and I'm going to say it, but Joe Blow in Colorado. And thankfully, because of 702, we were able to stop the attack. But that's not the way that happened. Yes, they picked up the terrorist in Pakistan. Yes, they know who he called in Colorado. But there was a time where the FBI could have maybe, and I say this with quote marks, quickly acquired a FISA on that individual and gone up on him and not just collected metadata, but real time information on that individual, let's say several days before he traveled to initiate a potential terrorist attack. It wasn't as a result of 702 that this whole thing was stopped.
Mm,
That's the story that was told.
right.
And there were a couple of those examples that went out that just factually were not exactly the way they were being told. 702 didn't have anything to do with stopping these terrorist attacks. They also couch 702 in terms of, well, because of 702, we're allowed to collect data on foreign individuals living overseas. The NSA was always allowed to do that. It just got codified into 702. There's
Mm,
nothing in the Constitution or the Fourth Amendment or anything else that requires uh, a warrant to collect intelligence or information on foreigners who don't live in the United States. It's never been required, and it's not required now. It's codified under 702. So they're kind of pointing to that with a nod and a wink, saying, "Well, because of 702, we captured this information. You could have captured it without 702."
So again, the political bureaucracy using the fine print and the big bold words to say, look over here. We got the bad guy because of it, so we got to reauthorize it. Why do you think the reauthorization is dangerous to societies moving forward?
I think it creates an avenue for the government to look at information on U.S. persons without a warrant, which violates the whole idea of general warrants, which we've never been allowed to have. There actually is an annual FISA warrant that gets blessed by the court. In other words, once a year, the DNI goes to the FISA court and goes, "Okay, here's the rules we've written for ourselves. We want you to bless these." And the FISA court goes, "Those are really good. Go ahead and operate under those rules." That's a general warrant. I mean, I don't know how you. I'm not a lawyer, but I don't think you have to be to say that's a general warrant. Um, I think that it ought to be that if they have probable cause that a U.S. citizen is involved in this, it's not a hard thing to do. You can get a warrant quickly, and even if you don't, there are, as there were under the old FISA previous to 702, emergency procedures where a phone call can authorize somebody to do what they're doing now as an emergency and then get a warrant to back that up later.
So it kind of defeats the purpose of having pieces in place that, and this is something that I've had an issue with for a long time. It seems like we used to have rules in place and checks and balances to help politicians and the government govern themselves and help govern the people. So that one branch could do something that the other branch was doing, and there was kind of some checks and balances there. But now it seems like those lines are so blurred, and this is something that's been going on since the 70s, but it seems like the original intent of it is far from what it is today. And that worries me because, especially now when access to media is like it never has been before. Um, and I tell my kids this all the time, like, what you do today has a massive effect on who you are when you're in your 40s, 50s, and
Mm-hmm.
60s. You say right now you might never want to run for office, but when you're 55 years old, you might say, you know what, I'm going to give it a try. But the things that happen to you when you're 16 years old are basically public record. They can find the tweet, they can find a Facebook
Mm-hmm.
post, they can find anything they want to on you now, and they'll hold it against you 40 years from now when you're going to run for office, no matter what it may be, because of the way media is. And now, essentially, anybody can look at it. Like, so you got the NSA and the CIA with the capabilities of doing this. The FBI's got it. It just seems like now we don't have privacy like we used to, even if we want to try to have privacy. The world's an open book.
Yeah. No, I think you're right. I, I think you're right.
It's scary. It's really kind of scary. And you know what? I already kind of have trust issues with the government. I was in the military and I work for the government now here on the Air Force Base. And there's just times where I'm like, you know what? I'm kind of ashamed and unhappy with the way some things are handled. And I think we could be doing a better job. We could be doing better by the taxpayers. And of course, then you have something like this where you go, how the heck are they getting away with this? How are they doing this? And every year getting a general warrant like that, like it's scary stuff.
Well, I think it's because it's so complicated. I don't trust that Congress has their finger on the pulse of it. I bet you there's less than a handful of congresspersons and senators that really understand
Oh yeah,
702 to the
guaranteed.
level I even wrote about.
Oh yeah. Oh, I doubt they even know the history of it. I'd be
Right,
shocked if
right,
more than I bet I could count on my hand, one
right,
hand, how many of them could quote to me the decade, the decade that it was, incepted.
right.
Like I would love to hear if more than one handful could tell me the decade, I'd be shocked. I mean, those
Have
guys
to
just
ask them to explain stellar wind and prism and see if they can explain that, because that's basically what 702 is. It
yeah.
has been blessed. Those programs, for right or wrong, have been blessed by 702.
Mm. So let's move on into writing again. Of course, you have a lot of stuff going on right now. What is the future looking like for you? You know, you want to do the CJ Hawk this year. You're halfway through the next Kiki Diaz book for
Mm-hmm.
FX Station. And of course, people can go out and get Rosalyn Station now and get a 3-chapter preview of that. What's kind of on the further horizon for you? Where do you see these series, more novellas going? What's kind of like your dream sheet of things you want to do?
Sure. So thanks for asking that. Um, with Kiki Diaz halfway through Fairfax Station, definitely have a plot in place for book three. I know what the title is going to be. I know what the plot is. I know how it's going to go. I just need to get through this one to get to that one.
All right.
So there'll definitely be three in the CJ Hawk series. So there's two books out there, and both of them I engaged a developmental editor who really helped me a lot on them, to tighten up the plot, to change some chapters around, to eliminate some chapters, to make sure I had enough descriptors and things like that in there. Got a lot of really good feedback and advice about how to tighten up both of those books. The first one I talked about, Department Echo. The second one is called Zulu Center. And it's really topical. It has a lot to do with like investigative genealogy and DNA and
Mm,
some of the things you see in the Brian Koberger case, the Idaho 4. There's
yeah,
some things about that in there that I didn't even intend to put in there. In fact, that was happening as the time I was writing it.
that's cool.
So I'm really excited about that book, and that will come out after Department Echo at some time. Again, another CJ Hawk thriller where he gets retained to solve yet another actual murder that really took place, actually a series of murders that took place in Northern Virginia that I just sort of fictionalized and had him the hero in solving. And then there's a third CJ Hawk book that I'm about halfway through. I stopped working on that about 6 months ago because I'm trying to sequence everything in the right order here to get it out. And that one's called Washington Field. Yet again, based on a actual murder that happens in Washington D.C. So all three of those CJ Hawk books are going to be out sometime. The second Kiki Diaz book will definitely be out in 2024. Not sure about the third one that I have sort of formatted in my mind. It'd be a stretch to say that would happen in 2024. And then I owe people, because I keep talking about it, a fourth novella with John Blackjack Morrison. And I've already there's a couple chapters of that in the back of the book you showed, the Volume 1 project series. There's a couple chapters in the back of that. The previews what I'm calling Project Gemstone, and that's a really cool story that has to do with Watergate.
Ooh,
Watergate and Area 51 in the same novella. How about that?
okay, I like
Yeah,
that. That's cool.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
All right. Well, before I
So is
let
that
you
enough?
go, yeah. All right. Before I let you go, I got the a dossier question from Jeff Circle that he wants me to ask you. So
Okay.
here it goes. Despite the many sad and unfortunate things you had to deal with as a member of law enforcement, every cop has a few fun stories about life on the job. For you now, though, do you think that you would enjoy being a cop today as much as before? And what would you tell young people in their 20s to do to prepare for the career today?
Wow, that's a big one. So you always look back on things like that, nostalgically, and of course, the farther away from it you are, you probably romanticize the good stuff and disregard the bad stuff. Um, but yeah, I have to say, I'd encourage people. We need people to do this. I mean, what if everybody says no? Who's going to show up? Um, as hard as it would be, and I know cops are facing a lot today, a lot more than we ever faced when I first put on a badge.
Yeah.
We didn't have body cameras, we didn't have cell phones and cameras on cell phones, people videotaping everything we did.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a lot harder job than when I started in this profession going on 40 years ago, which is hard to believe. So yeah, I'd encourage people to do it because I need them to do it. I need somebody to do that.
Okay, so where can people go to find out more about you, subscribe to a newsletter, and stay caught up on all the news so they can get all these books as they're coming out in 24 and 25?
So www.fxregan, Regan, everything's right there. So you can sign up for the Substack, you can sign up for the newsletter, which are basically the same. I kind of do everything under Substack. So if you sign up for one, you're on both. And then I put out every time something new comes up, I have a page called New. I'll post the links to this podcast on there once we're done. So yeah, that's the best place to go. I'm on Twitter at FX Regan, Instagram at FX Regan, and then the Substack is http:// fxregan.substack.com. So it's all right there.
Perfect. And I'll have it all in the show notes so that people can check it out. I definitely encourage people to go out and read your article about FISA and 702 because we could have talked about a whole hour or two about it alone, but it's very interesting stuff. I like that you have your opinion in there, but it didn't seem so like one angled. It's a great article. I loved reading it. Really got me interested into looking into more of it. But I want to thank you for your time. Thanks for coming on. Thanks for the books. I can't wait to dig into them. And of course, we'll do this again.
Thank you for having me, man. It's been great.